With the release of Honkai Star Rail 2.2, a certain character is sure to make break teams more relevant than ever before. It won't be surprising if break teams become relevant in this upcoming meta, but if you are interested in using a break team, you should first understand how the game's toughness and break system works. There are a lot of factors you might not know of that can substantially affect the damage of break teams, including enemy toughness, break element, break efficiency, and a lot more. In this guide, I'll go through those factors and everything else you need to know about break to help you create the most efficient break teams. Before going into weakness break, we must first understand toughness. Toughness is the white bar shown above an enemy's health bar. Attacks of the element the enemy is weak to will deal toughness damage to that enemy. All enemies have a set toughness value, and all attacks have a set toughness damage. Let's look at Shueiji for an example. Shueiji's basic attack deals 30 toughness damage, which is the case for most basic attacks. Her skill will deal 60 toughness damage to the main target and 30 to adjacent enemies. Her follow-up attacks will deal 15 per hit, and her ult will deal 120, the highest in the game. This damage can also be increased with weakness break efficiency, like that given by Ruan Mei's skill. To give you an idea of how much toughness enemies have, this enemy has 30 toughness, while an enemy like Sam has 600 toughness. This value not only affects how long it will take to break, but break damage is also affected by the enemy's max toughness, as we'll see later on. Once an enemy's toughness bar is broken, weakness break will occur. Weakness break will deal break damage, delay the enemy's action by 25%, and apply a debuff. The break damage and debuff generally depend on the element of the attack used to break. Additionally, when an enemy is broken, the broken multiplier of the damage formula will change from 0.9 to 1, which means that your attacks will do around 11% more damage to broken enemies. Enemies' toughness bar will be regenerated when it's their turn again. Efficient break teams generally want characters that can quickly deplete toughness to more consistently deal damage from the effects of weakness break. I'll go through some good units to use in break teams at the end of the video. But now, let's look at the first of weakness break's effects. Break damage is the damage taken by enemies at the moment they are broken. This damage varies a lot depending on which element is used to break. But before looking at that, we need to look at two important multipliers that will also affect your break damage. In case you don't know, multipliers are values that are part of the game's damage formula. All multipliers are multiplied together to calculate the final damage. For example, a multiplier of 0.5 will halve your damage, while a multiplier of 2 will double it. The first multiplier we will look at is the level multiplier. This is where most of the break damage comes from. As its name suggests, this multiplier depends on your character's level. For example, at level 1, this multiplier is only 54. At level 70, it's around 2659. At level 80, it's around 3767. The break damage increase from a level 70 character to a level 80 character is around 42%, an amount that you definitely should not ignore. For this reason, leveling up your breakers to the highest level you can is extremely important. By the way, you can find multipliers for all levels in the Star Rail wiki, which I've linked in the description. The second multiplier is the max toughness multiplier. This multiplier is calculated with this formula. As we can see, this multiplier depends on the enemy's max toughness. Due to the nature of this formula, enemies with higher toughness values will take more break damage. For example, this multiplier will be 0.75 when breaking an enemy with 30 toughness. But when breaking an enemy like Sam, who has 600 toughness, this multiplier becomes 5.5. If you find all this math a bit confusing, don't worry. What is most important about these multipliers is understanding that the higher your character's level is, and the higher the enemy's max toughness is, the more break damage you will do. Now that we understand these multipliers, we can look at how the element of the attack used to break affects the damage. Each element has a constant multiplier that will be applied to your break damage. For fire and physical, this multiplier is 2. For wind, it is 1.5. For ice and lightning, it is 1. And for quantum and imaginary, it is 0.5. This means that physical and fire deal the most break damage. They deal twice the damage of ice and lightning and 4 times the damage of quantum and imaginary. If you want to maximize your break damage, fire and physical units are usually great choices. However, break damage is not all the damage caused by weakness break. Each element also applies a specific debuff when breaking enemies. But before I go into these debuffs, I'll explain external multipliers that will also affect your break damage significantly. This is the complete formula for break damage. The base damage is what I talked about earlier, the constant which depends on the element times the level multiplier times the toughness multiplier. This base damage is then multiplied by these other multipliers. I'll go through these multipliers and show how they affect our final damage. The first is break effect. If you have no break effect, then this multiplier is just 1, which means it won't affect damage. However, if you do have break effect, you can significantly increase this multiplier. To get this multiplier, simply divide your break effect by 100 and add 1. With 100 break effect, this multiplier becomes 2, meaning that your damage will be doubled. Keep in mind that there are diminishing returns with break effect, so going all in on break effect might not always be the best idea. Still, stats like attack or crit won't affect break damage, so if you aren't going for a hybrid build, break effect is one of the few stats you'll care about. The next multiplier is the defense multiplier. This is affected by defense reducing debuffs, like that of Silver Wolves or Pale Assaults. I won't go into detail about this multiplier here, as it is a bit complicated. If you are interested in a detailed explanation of this, you can check out my Gunaifen video linked in the description. What you need to know about this multiplier is that it scales exponentially. This means that while a little amount of defense down won't do much, a lot of defense down can massively increase your damage. Though, keep in mind that there is a cap for the damage increase from defense down at 100% defense down. With 100% defense down, this multiplier is simply 1. With 0 defense down against a level 95 enemy, like those of MOC 12, this multiplier is around 0.465. Next is the resistance multiplier. This is affected by the enemy's elemental resistance and any resistance penetration buffs or resistance down debuffs on enemies you might have. The enemy's elemental resistance usually won't matter, as enemies won't resist elements they are weak to. If you are breaking an implanted enemy, like with Silver Wolf or Boothill, then enemies might still have some resistance. This multiplier can also be very powerful. For example, if an enemy doesn't resist the break element and you have a run May buffing penetration by 25%, that is a 25% increase to your total damage. It is not a bad idea to have sources of resistance penetration or resistance down on your break team. Next is the vulnerability multiplier. Vulnerability is a somewhat rare stat that can affect break damage. Most vulnerabilities only affect specific damage like dot or follow-ups, though some will affect break. Some examples are Welt's ultimate, a 12% general vulnerability, Gunaifen's fire keys, which can reach up to 30%, and Gallagher's talent, which gives up to a 13.2% break damage vulnerability. Vulnerabilities are rare and usually don't give huge damage increases, but they are nice bonuses that will contribute to your final break damage. And finally, we have the broken multiplier, which will simply always be 0.9 when dealing break damage. So now we know all the stats that affect your final break damage. This example was somewhat conservative as I calculated with only a Firebreaker, Gallagher and Ron May, leaving space for one more character. We had 0 defense down and only 100 break effect, which means that you can get a lot more than the damage shown here. Again, you do not need to know the math of this. What is important is that you understand which stats will increase your break team's damage. Here is a summary of everything that will affect your break damage. Other stats, like damage bonus, attack, crit damage and crit rate, will not increase your break damage at all. When building a break team, make sure to include characters that will increase the stats that actually matter for break. Break damage is only the first half of weakness breaks damage. When enemies are broken, a specific debuff is applied depending on the element used to break. These debuffs all have different damage and properties. Physical break causes bleed. Bleed is a damage over time that will last 2 turns, dealing damage based on this formula. Normal enemies will lose 16% of their max HP when bleed is triggered. Elites and bosses lose 7%. There is a cap for bleed-based damage. Bleed-based damage will never be more than 2 times the level multiplier times the max toughness multiplier. The nature of bleed means that it can be really strong against enemies with a lot of HP, as it scales directly off of their HP. Fire Break applies Burn. Burn is also a damage over time that lasts 2 turns. The base damage for Burn is simply the level multiplier of your character. Ice Break applies Freeze. Freeze is not a damage over time and lasts 1 turn. The base damage for Freeze is also just the level multiplier of your character. Freeze additionally skips the enemy's turn while advancing their action forward by 50%. I won't go into how action values work here, but let me know if you'd like to see an action value and speed guide. Lightning Break applies Shock. Shock is a damage over time that lasts 2 turns. Its base damage is 2 times the level multiplier. Wind Break applies Wind Shear. Wind Shear is a stackable damage over time that lasts 2 turns. Normal enemies receive 1 stack when broken, while elites and bosses receive 3. The base damage of Wind Shear is the amount of stacks times the level multiplier. This means that Wind Shear is stronger than Burn and Shock against elites and bosses. Quantum Break applies Entanglement. Entanglement is not a dot and only deals damage once. Still, the base damage of Entanglement can be really high. Entanglement is stackable, up to 5 stacks. It receives a stack every time the entangled enemy is hit. The base damage of Entanglement is 0.6 times the stack count times the level multiplier times the max toughness multiplier. This can be really strong. For example, this base damage would be around 62,000 against Sam, assuming you reach 5 stacks with a level 80 breaker. Entanglement also delays the enemy's action, scaling off your break effect. Finally, Imaginary Break applies Imprisonment. Imprisonment deals no damage, but greatly delays enemies, scaling off your break effect. It also slows them down by 10%. While Imaginary Break will delay enemies the most, the damage is also clearly the worst, as it has the lowest break damage and thus no debuff damage. Those are all the debuffs caused by break and their base damage. This base damage is added to the exact same formula used by break damage to calculate the final damage. This means that the stats that will affect this debuff damage are the same ones you want for break damage. Though, keep in mind that if a debuff is a DOT, it can take advantage of dot-specific vulnerabilities. And that was everything you should know about break. It might sound complicated, but focus on the important things, like which element break you want or which supports you will use. Before I end this video, I'll go through some good characters to use in break teams. The best character for break teams is Ruan-Mei. All of Ruan-Mei's kit contributes to a break team's damage in some way. She increases speed, break effect, break efficiency, break damage, resistance penetration, and even defense ignore at Eidolon 1. Ruan-Mei is undeniably fantastic for break and pretty much a necessity for any top tier break team. Silver Wolf is also great for break teams. Her weakness implant allows you to run breakers you wouldn't be able to run against certain enemies. Her defense and resistance down debuffs are also great for break teams. Not only does she provide great buffs for break teams, she can also be a solid breaker herself, as she's quantum and all her skills deplete toughness. Bella is also a great support for break teams, as her ultimate will greatly decrease all of the enemy's defenses. As for sustainers, all can work, but Gallagher works especially well with break teams. Due to his break effect scaling, Gallagher will have high break effect. Him being fire also means that his breaks will hit hard. The debuff applied by his ult will also increase the damage enemies take from all breaks. He can also break enemies' toughness quickly, even more so if you have his idol on 6. Shui Yi is a fantastic breaker as her whole kit revolves around breaking. She scales off of break effect, which allows her to run a hybrid build. Her entanglements will hit very hard as she will always have a lot of break effect. Her ult also has the highest toughness damage in the game and ignores enemy weakness. Her eidolons are also all great if you have them. Luca and Su Shang are both great breakers. Being physical characters, their breaks can deal massive damage when fighting high HP enemies. And while these physical breakers are great, Boothill will very likely be not only the best physical breaker, but the best single target breaker in the game once he releases. Finally, there is a new support that is fantastic for break teams. While I won't be talking about them here due to spoilers, I'll make a video about them very soon. Weakness breaking is a core element of the Star Rail combat system, yet most don't understand it. I hope that after this video you have a clear idea of how this system works, so you can build teams that use the break system to your advantage. Let me know if you enjoyed this in-depth guide style, and if there are any other game mechanics you'd like to learn about. And as always, thank you so much for watching.